pick up on our study in the book of Galatians, as we have done, which has been our directive in the season. The title of today's study is, make sure I'm on, God of Distinction. A God of distinction. He will have us to understand this and to know this. Before I go there, my brother did something, he grabbed a pen, and that was, the people in the house know. I want to make sure everyone takes your notes, because this is part of our covenant living structure. So I'm going to speak on the God of distinction. You know, we're living in a time where the lines of distinction have been greatly blurred. And that's critical. When I talk about this thing being greatly blurred, it's like the lines have been so moved where the sacred and the common have lost their distinction. We have lived where holy and profane are being merged. Then there's an aggressive agenda that's in place to remove the line of distinction even between the genders. A time of distinction. This spirit and what we're about is not of God. In fact, it's anti-God. How you see that? Because I know that God is a God of distinction. We must embrace that thought and hold on to that thought as we move forward in our study. So go ahead and turn with me to Galatians 2. Chapter 2. I'll pick up, let me just kind of look at verses 7 and 8, but 7 and 9. So as we pick up our study in Galatians, today I want to address the importance of distinction. You know, during our last study, we focused on Paul's return back to Jerusalem. He returned in response to a revelation that I commanded him he go back to Jerusalem. He came back to Jerusalem so that he could submit to the authority structure that God had established on earth. He came back to Jerusalem to stand before those pillars, those elders, those leaders that God had purposed on earth. The ones that whom he had given the authority to bind and loose on earth. He came back to share with them the message that he had reviewed, the message that he had received and that he was sharing as he was moving out throughout the whole region of Galatia and throughout all his activities, his functions. He came back to share with them the message that God had given him for their review and for their examination, so that they will be fully resolved and convinced in their minds that what he did was right in point. As we studied, as we talked to share, we said, why would it be necessary for him to do that? Again, he could just sent them a letter. He could just talked about it. There was something big that was in it. Our last study was focused on the area of authority. And Paul was aligning himself under the authority structure that God put on earth. And when he brought forth the message, he said over and over throughout his whole teachings, he didn't receive this message on how he was teaching it. He wasn't receiving it not from men, this was not something that someone had schooled him on, but he had received it straight from heaven. And so as he was talking to Sharon, now he was bringing forth that revelation before them. And when they listened to what he had to say, they had to listen to how he was sharing. It was something that they could look up and say, oh yeah, I think that's good. No, this is not something they had to do by root. This was something that they had to hear, digest, and understand, and receive, and be on one accord to understand the fullness of what he was sharing. To ensure two things. One, that there would be no divided house. It's not going to be a two-headed monster here. They had to listen to him and understand and receive it and embrace fully what he's saying. You know, as we shared last week, it says, Yeshua made a comment, he said, a house divided against itself would fall. So what he was saying, what they were saying, is not by him just trying to convince someone. They had to listen to it, understand it, digest it. They said they had midrash, they dialogued about it, they discussed it. And then they come to a firm conclusion when it's all said and done to put their hands upon him and to give him the right hand of fellowship. So they need to get it in their mind so there'd be no division. They'd be on one accord, and Paul stood back he was excited to understand that he had not run in vain. My efforts and what I'm saying was not futile. This was purposeful. And they fully embraced what he was doing. They understood it. They seen the bigness of what God was doing in it. So in doing so, as they went to talk and share, things that transpired. See, Paul didn't just pop up and come out and drop in the moon with something that they hadn't heard. There's things that was happening big time, but see, in the focus world and how they were moving, this was kind of expanding from where they're at. See, because it says in the text, as we came through from last week, as they went to talk and share, see, God first exposed it to Peter when he sent him into the home of Cornelius. So Peter was one of the witnesses that came up and started talking to him because he's seen it and it stunned him. Because they had a mindset, there was a process in place that they would follow. They understood so that they would not profane themselves. So when God sent Peter to Cornelius, and he already quickened Cornelius' heart to tell him to send for Peter, the two edges were meeting. And when they came together, what Peter understood was he was in the upper room. He understood on that day of Shavuot, on Pentecost, when the Spirit fell, and how they all spoke, and tongues of fire came upon them. They knew, when Peter went to testify, he said 3,000 were received. He understood that. He said, but wait, when he walked up to Cornelius' house, God had given him the vision first to get him there, with the sheet coming down, and Peter saying, Lord, I haven't touched anything. I don't touch things that are unclean. God said, don't call unclean what I'm cleaning. So when he walked inside, he says, I showed up, and he just started sharing. He says, Cornelius looked at him and says, well, I was sitting and praying. I was doing what I was doing, praying, and then the Holy Spirit, something illuminated my mind and told me to call for you. Backtrack. We understood Cornelius is not just some profane soldier out there in the market. But when they go to describe him, even the Jewish brethren among the community, they call him a good man, a righteous man. They said that he even built a synagogue. So what we come to understand was he was a God-fearer. He's doing everything. He's a Roman soldier, but he's a God-fearer. And this is the one God sends Peter to. So Peter comes up in this God-fearer's house and he goes to start talking to him. And right in the middle of his discussion, as he starts sharing to him what happened to them, he starts talking to him about the power of what God was doing. He said the Spirit said, boom, and fell in the house and his whole household. Cornelius and everybody, he starts speaking in tongues. Peter's sitting there right in the middle of his dialogue. Before he can say anything else, it's like it's out of his hands. He's just sharing his word and it says, boom, and he turns around, stops, and he looks. And he turns around and says, now I see that God is not a respecter of persons. Same things happened to them that happened to us. So then Peter went back among the 12, and they even asked him, why would you go there? Why did you do that? And he told them, this is not my own doing. The Spirit sent me there, and this is what happened. Well, that testimony has gotten stuck in the back. Went no further. But when Paul shows up and tells them the story, well, God stopped and rescued me and what he's having me to do to the Goyim, the Gentiles. Peter looked at him and said, oh, yeah, I remember. That happened to me. Barnabas, who they all had faith in, Strong says, I'll tell you, I'm testifying about all that they're doing. James looked at the thing, is this something strange? Then they understand, they remember the words that God put in the Tanakh, in the prophets, when John says, I will not do anything without revealing it first to my prophets. So they go back and start searching the word, and they come across the word of Amos and the different prophets that showed where God was going to reach out to these Goyim. This is all part of the equation. They didn't deliberately focus on it. Now Paul, who's been targeted, commissioned, moving, is bringing it straight to them. So now as they all had digressed, they all understand. They can see what God is doing. When it's all said and done, you can almost say, not only were they affirmed and resolved with what Paul was doing, they literally ordained him. They can ordain him as such because they put their right hand in fellowship and told him, we commission you to go ahead and do what you're doing. And you know, it's interesting. It said, Paul embraced what they had said. He said, because from that moment, Paul started addressing himself as being the apostle to the Gentiles. I understand my call. This is where God would have him be. We see that in Romans 11:13, where Paul starts addressing himself as he's being set aside as an apostle now to the Gentiles. You also see him speak about it in 2 Timothy 2:7, where he refers to himself as being this apostle to the Gentiles. You know, this is powerful because what he does, he comes to the full realization. He comes to full realization, for this cause was I born. I understand what I'm about. See, in my reasoning of thinking, I have purposed myself to sit on the board with the Sanhedrin. I set myself being one of the elders of the council. I see myself as a protege sitting at the feet of Gamaliel. I know things I want to do, but now with this revelation and all that took place, he understood that's not where God would have me. For this cause, to take this message to the Goyim, to the Gentiles, was I called. This is why I was born. This is why I was born. You know, ironically, as I thought that, when God told me, I just share with you about the repentance, God turned around and said, don't say that again. I look at it and I can try and say, now I understand for this cause was I born. You know, God told me earlier, as part of the testimony, he looked at me and turned and says, I shared bits and pieces with you guys before. He says, now you've always known that ministry is the integral part of your life. You felt it, you sensed it. I put the people around you, it's all been there. And then when he called me, go forth, and this is where I had stepped from the bank and stuff, that's when he turned and says, the difference is, he says, you never pursued it. You've known it, but you didn't pursue it. And so when I'm saying all this stuff like, you know, I don't want the helm, I want to do that. God John says, you've always known it. You didn't pursue it. But now, you're going to be about it. Because in it is the fulfillment of what I birthed you to be. So for this reason was Paul born, and he understood. You know, when you look into verses 7 through 9 in Galatians, in that book, there's something that transpired there that we should be mindful of. I'm just going to read it because what transpired is these elders, these apostles, when they heard the testimony, they understood what God was doing. They set something in place and they made it clear. In it is a structure which Paul can function, they could function, because they seen the bigness of what God was doing. That's what they said. See, at the end of the conclusion of the council, they said, on the contrary, Paul's telling them, this is verse 7, they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel for the Goyim. They looked at him and they could see what he was doing, and they knew that he has been called to go to the uncircumcised, so the Goyim. Just as Peter has been called when he preached in Jerusalem and 3,000 were saved, James and John, all of them. He says when they preached, they were preaching to their brethren. They stood in that city as they spoke to their Jewish brethren. They said the people were they were converting and come to them and says, what can we do to be saved? And Peter and guys, they said all things in common. They were meeting every day in the temple. So they understood as they were teaching and sharing among their brethren, where Peter was pretty much like the leader, the spokesman. Just as Peter has been called to his Jewish brethren, since the one working in Peter to make an emissary to to the Jewish brethren worked into me the same call, but to the Goyim, to the Gentiles. What he's saying was just as effective as Peter is within his brethren at home, Paul was being just as effective to the Goyim on the outside. Both coming from two different points. But they was able to stop, and they were able to see, and they were able to understand that God wasn't seeing nothing different. He wasn't respecting. They were both being effectual, and they were able to put their hands up, affirmation around him. See, so Paul was ecstatic after sharing with them, because those that had the authority to bind and loose on earth has set in place. Because as it said toward the bottom part, so in verse 9, it says, so they told them, they extended to them the right hand of fellowship to Barnabas and Paul, so that we might go to the Goyim and they to the brethren. Basically what it said is, we will continue doing what we're doing here at home to our Jewish brethren. You continue doing what you're doing among the Goyim. So Paul understood, just as Peter and Paul, just as Peter and James and the apostles were all faithful, he was faithful. So they set in place, because they set in place a structure. Paul, you go to the Goyim. We'll stay here. See, but they understood the fullness of God's redemptive plan, specifically after they started going through the Tanakh and the Torah to see it. I could see when Paul was there and he had this council, those influencers that were giving him fits, that came back to Galatians and was talking about trying to undo his authority and undo everything. They were stunned by what the revelation of the council for Paul to go to return home. That stopped all that murmuring. They would still murmur, but they're murmuring under the auspices that there was a consensus that's set in place. Now, I want to stress a key point in what I just said. And then that key point was I talked about what Peter was doing and what Paul was doing. The key point in that decision is that Peter and Paul weren't teaching or preaching two separate gospels. I've heard it, and I've been in circles that talk this way. They were just saying, yeah, so Peter had a message that it was like heavily toward the Jews. And as a shape toward that. Paul had a message that was just shaped for the Goyim. It's like they split the gospel on how it was placed, but that's not true. That's not what they did. Not what they did. The gospel was built around the facet of the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. And so speaking of what Yeshua did for our salvation, that brought us in. He was the fullness of the messianic promise that they saw. So as Peter stood up and spoke before the 3,000, they understood talking about the death, burial, and resurrection. Paul did the same thing. He stepped out, and when he started talking to the Goyim, as he was sharing with the Gentiles, he was speaking to them about the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. So they both were on the same accord. No, it wasn't like two separate gospels as such. But what they had defined was that there were two distinct calls taking place. The two distinct calls, the apostles, when they start speaking about Peter and Paul, speaking to two distinct people groups. Same message, just being directed to two different distinct people groups. They were able to witness that God was with both of them, with all of them, and had given them the success wherever they went. In essence, Paul's message, when he went out and he started sharing with the Goyim, the Gentiles, was that you don't have to become Jewish to receive Christ. You don't have to go through the conversion. You don't have to go through the circumcision. You don't have to go. That's not what it's about. It's almost like saying, like where we were wasn't good enough. In fact, they had to add something. That's what the influencers are doing. They're trying to add something. They're trying to say they couldn't fully walk this walk if they hadn't gone the full way of conversion. And Paul let them know, he says, oh, you Galatians, he said, when you heard the message the death, burial, and resurrection. When he understood about the picture of salvation, he said, you were quickened. Gifts were imparted into you. When you came into a saving knowledge of Christ, there's nothing more you had to do. And now they felt like there's more that we have to do. You know, sometimes we get like this. I'm just saying, where we, you know, in this season, as I've just been growing in this, sometimes, you know, I have a desire. You know, I love my Jewish brethren. You know, and I love the land, the people. But I even had the point where I can even hope or wish, well, I wish I was Jew. Why? Because I want it all. I want the deeper revelation. I want everything that God had. I can be one of the chosen people if I can do that. And God let me know, he says, I know who you were, Matt. I shaped you, I built you. If I wanted you to be a Jew, I made you a Jew. Not saying if I can't go through the full thing of conversion and be a proselyte and be grafted in and such. But he's telling me something else. He says, I know who you are. He says, you don't have to be Jewish in order to come to the fullness of what I'm doing for you. But you know, today it's really strange because as we walk in this walk, because of all talking about Jewish brethren, their rebellion and the things of that nature where they were been sent into exile and God would come back and he'd chastise himself. This whole thing, when that nation was undone by Rome in 70, and everyone was dispersed, something amazing happened. See, because now we feel like we're it, you know. For example, Paul was telling the people, you don't have to become Jewish in order to receive Yeshua. Today we got the shoe on the other foot, because we're going to our Jewish brethren saying, you don't have to become Gentile to receive Yeshua. And we got the church going to telling them, they feel like, where they feel ostracized, this Torah says, you're telling me that Torah is wrong. I can't keep the commandment. I can't keep shopping. I can't keep my culture. That if I come in there, that when Yeshua rose and this whole gospel, all that's done away with. But Paul said all that's done away with. So that means I've got to give up my heritage, my thoughts, my people, my ways, in order to come into a saving knowledge of Christ. And they get upset because the Torah says, that's how come they get fearful when people go out and try and proselytize them. You know, saying different things, saying, you're coming to me with things that are contrary to what Torah is telling me. And now we seem like at the forefront of this whole movement, and it's like the whole thing flipped because of the dispersion. No, what Paul said when he says we don't have to become Jewish, what he's saying, this was a major truth. This is what in their discussion had to embrace and try to understand in Paul's day was what? He was stressing that the Gentiles don't have to leave your culture. You don't have to leave. You don't have to join another ethnicity in order to believe Christ. Why? Because the distinctive God of creation receives us just as he made us. You see, he understood the people that was there. That's what Paul was talking about over in Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 7 to 20. I'm sorry, 1 Corinthians 7, verse 20 to 24. He'll speak in terms of that. I'm going to look at that real quickly. I said, it's something very distinct that God's trying to tell us as he's bringing us into the fuller understanding of where he's at. Verse 20 says, each person should remain in the condition he was in when he was called. There's no change. He says, that's when it goes on and reads and says, were you a slave when you were called? Well, don't let it bother you. Although you can gain your freedom, take advantage of the opportunity. For a person who was a slave when he was called is the Lord's free man now. Likewise, someone who was a free man when he is called is a slave to the Messiah. He said, you are bought with a price, so you do not have to become slaves to other people. Brothers, let each one remain in the condition in which you were called. You know, it says, whether you're bond or you're free, what have you, you don't do this. God knows who you are. He just called you to be that. To be that. What do I mean by that? Let me go back, get ahead of myself. So I understand that it's this blurred line of distinction, what I'm talking about. What God was dealing with us and dealing with them and dealing with the people as a whole is why we're reading Galatians right now. Our whole study in Galatians is brought about because something transpired. What do I mean about that? You know, when I run into Galatians and stuff, there's something that transpired. When they walked out of council, they said something that was part of a structure they put together. That structure we forgot. I think we as a people forgot. When they clearly defined, they turn and says, I'm just using Peter to talk about the full 12 and the rest of them. He says, Peter will still maintain his call to his brethren, to the Jewish folk. Paul, we understood the majesty of what God has done to you. So Paul, you have the grace to be the apostle to the Gentiles. You have with that line of restriction or that structure in place, they said very clearly, Paul, you are apostle, you are sent. You've been sent to teach and to share your message with the Gentiles. Rabbi, Matthew, why are you hammering home on start? I said, because we forget something. Remember I talked about a mind shift? I said, so we get inside, I said, there has to be a mind shift. I said, we are not of Paul's world. We're sitting in a whole different culture, a whole different means, a whole different generation. I said, but the main thing was, I said, we have to make a mind shift in order to appreciate what he's saying, what he's doing. And all that I just shared, this is where this thing hits the wall. Because when I look up in Toronto and says, why are we studying Galatians? Why are we going through this facet? As I walk out this Hebraic understanding, this walk, why am I struggling in this area? When people come to me and says, they'll say things to me like, have you read Galatians? What did Paul say? All that stuff that you're pursuing is all under the law. I mean, it's all under the blood. You're supposed to be saved by grace and all this other stuff. It's because we've come to the point that we have forgotten the two distinct calls that took place after that council. When they told Paul to go forth, Paul being the apostle to the Goyim, to the Gentiles. With that understanding, if I read that and I say, okay, Paul is talking to the Gentiles. Paul is talking to the people. What is he saying? Paul says that every letter that Paul writes, all of them, should be read as such. Who is he talking to? I'm speaking in terms of, when we look at the book of Galatians. I'm looking at the book of Ephesians. I'm looking at the book of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. These are his letters to all the churches and such. I'm looking at the book of 1st and 2nd Corinthians. You look at Colossians, Philippians, even the book of Romans. The essence is, Paul's not writing to his Jewish brethren, nor to the proselytes. He's not even trying to speak to them. That's not the issue. He's not the issue. He's writing to God-fearers. So if I go back and Toronto says, when I look at somebody in Toronto says, if I go to my Jewish brothers and says, they're under the old way. Paul was fully under that way. Paul says, I was Jew, Pharisee of Pharisee. He said, of the stock of Benjamin, I'm perfect. He said, I understand my heritage. I understand my walk. I know the covenants that God made with us as the people. When God made things with us as the people, he said, these are eternal. covenants. These aren't ending covenants. He said these things are everlasting. So when Paul was speaking, he's speaking to the Jewish brethren, to God-fearers, those people like Cornelius, who's coming to an understanding in the house under the Messianic understanding and trying to say, how do we walk this thing out? So, when Paul went back to Jerusalem, you remember this is when they end up rioting in the temple. He came back with Timothy. He came back with was it Titus? Silas. There you go. That's why I love a student. He come back with Silas. Why? He said, and they said, here's the man who's teaching us to forsake the Torah. James, John, Peter, all the guys in the room, they said, we know that the thing that you're saying is not true. That you're not teaching against the Torah. You're not teaching against the law. You're not doing that. But just so that they can see and understand that you haven't forsaken your ways, your ethnicity, and the call that God has placed upon us as a people, take these two men who has a vow, a Nazareth vow. Take them to the temple, offer your sacrifices. Go before them. They can see that you're still walking according to Torah, straight along the way, that you haven't deviated, that you are walking in line with God's covenant. And Paul shaved his head. Paul took the people, paid their cost to go into the temple to do so. But what we do, what we find ourselves doing, we look and we will swear, or people will come up and they'll swear that Paul forsook all that, stepped inside, and now he's walking contrary to what they're doing. They would even they would even go as far as saying, because of what Yeshua did on the Shabbat, Yeshua is forsaking the Torah, the covenant way. He's fighting against them. So it's easy for us as God-fearers, as Gentiles, to look back at them and to point against their ethnicity and what they're trying to do and think it's wrong because of what his letters are saying. And Paul's the finality of what they came out of their understanding, when they came out of that council, they says, let them do as, don't put anything more on them. They give them the Noahic laws. They said, have them stop from being adulterers, idolaters, drinking blood. If we do this stuff, everything else will be okay. Give them the basics so they aren't profane. He says, then they said, why? Because where they're living and where they're going, they're in every state, there are synagogues that are there that they're going around, and they will grow just like everyone else is growing. They will put away things just like everyone else is putting away. Give them the basics. Don't let them be idolatrous. What do you mean? If you call them, they're no longer looking at Diana or whatever deity they're looking at. Stop all that. Step into the house. Understand Christ. Don't let them be fornicators, or like that was a big thing in regard to temple worship. Stop that stuff. And don't let them go about drinking blood, because that has been foundational from the beginning. God says, for in the blood is life. So in doing so, what we have come into play, understanding of saying, when Paul started working and started writing his letters, all those letters I was talking about, and how he's dialoguing and what he's talking about, he's not talking to the Jewish brethren about that. They were looking at him and says, what do you mean we can't do this? That's not who he's talking to. We got to, again, with the mind shift, understand who's he talking to. He's writing not to the Jewish brethren or to those proselytes that had become fully converted. He's talking to God-fearers. They're the whole focus of his writing. And you know, the thing that's really strange is, after all the time, we as a people, we come to the point where we believe the whole gospel message has been centered on us. It's about us, all about us. It's all about us. So it's up to us to save the world. We got to save our Jewish brethren and everything according to our ways. This is, when Yeshua came, it's all about us. We left the whole other part of the equation out of the picture. When Paul came, look at his letters. Everything, we had a line of distinction, a line that had been put in place has been gone, and we're thinking like, now it's our task to go change them and make them like us. Oh, shoot, Matt, you shouldn't have said that. See, you just could not behave yourself. You had to go there, didn't you? Yes, I did. Because something got distorted. We forgot the distinction of Paul's call, specifically as it related to the 12. They were sent to their own nation. They were sent to the nation when Yeshua told them, stay here until you and do it power on high. That was their commission, to seek and save the lost sheep of Israel. That's what they were doing. That's how come they was content to stay in Jerusalem. That's how come as they were coming together, fellowshipping together. That's how come Peter couldn't go into Cornelius' house, because they're focusing on their brethren. But you know the weird thing? They didn't see the bigness of God's plan on how he was going to redeem the whole world. They focused, but they couldn't see the full redemption until Paul stepped up to that place and they got on one accord to understand that God is not a respecter of person. He's a God of distinction. When I look back, I said, we get to the point that we think it's all about us. But of that original call, what's taking place, we are the expansion of what God is doing. We're the expansion of that commission. See, Paul was sent to us, the branches. Paul speaking to the branches, the ones that were grafted in. That's why in the scripture it talks about you just being a wild branch being grafted into the olive tree. He says, now if God can separate the true branches, you just don't get envious and don't get all haughty and don't think that you're something. You're part of the same plan, but you're not them. He said, you were just grafted in. You see, I said there was a distinct order in God's plan. As when Yeshua came and he started speaking and interacting with his people. He said, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. And all things were made by him. Without him was not anything made that was made. They said that he came into his own first. And they didn't know him. There was a distinct plan that was put in place. And what was that plan? Why would Yeshua speak? Why would he call the 12? What was he operating in? What was their call? What were they to do? Well, if you look at Romans 1:16, Scripture speaks in terms that says, as he went forth with this message, it was to the Jew first. Jew first, and then the Gentile. It says the same thing over in Romans 2:9-10. It says, speak in terms of saying, even justice, he says, will begin at the house. To the Jew first, and then to the Goyim. He spoke of it. Even when Yeshua was walking the earth, he made that comment to the Syrophoenician woman. She came up to him, she's trying to get him to heal her daughter. And he says, not meat. He said, I've been sent unto the lost house of Israel. He said, but it's not meat to take the children's meat and throw it to the dogs, throw it to the goyim. What was he saying? He said he could do that. He did do it. He said, but his focus was on looking for the lost sheep, to redeem the lost sheep of the house of Israel. There was but then, in the same vein, as he starts speaking about that, then he goes over into John 10:16, and he reveals Paul's plan. Although he says, talk about not tossing children's meat to the dogs, and talk about he's come for the lost house of Israel, the lost sheep. Then he goes back and says, in John 10, he says, but there are other sheep that are not of this fold. Those two must I bring in. He says, I'm focusing on the first, the lost house of Israel. I'm focused on them. But it's bigger than that, which they couldn't see at that time, is which Paul comes in place. And Yeshua, he says, I get him because I need him. Like we stopped on the road to Damascus. He turns on and says, I must show him what great things he must see. For I'm going to send him to the Goyim. So as Yeshua says, he's speaking and he's seeking the first part of the commission, and that was to the nation of Israel and to all the lost sheep. But he said there's another part of this because God so loved the world. And there's a plan, there's an order that's in place. So God so loved the world. He said there's other sheep. There's something among you that you guys don't know that I too must bring them in so that there be one body and one shepherd. So when Paul is speaking, and when he speaks in letters, he speaks in Galatians, he speaks in things, he starts speaking about being under the law and being free from circumcision or being led by the Spirit. All these things that seem like sometimes they bump up against his Jewish brethren is because he wasn't dealing with them. He's talking to someone who is keeping 3 major ones. But they will come into a fuller understanding the longer they stay with them. For example, when God called me into this Hebraic awakeness, this Messianic awakeness, do you know how long it took me before I kept Shabbat? I was just an infant. I started reading, trying to understand. But you think I was a Sabbath keeper right from the beginning? Off and on, just because I didn't fully understand it. Was I kosher eating? Love tenderloins. Love conies. Used to do a lot with steak and lobster. Clam strips. Oh, eat them like popcorn. But the more I came to a clear understanding, and I started to understand what God was called clean and unclean. And I started seeing health issues. I'm thinking, God who made all things, he made everything. He made our digestive system, he made our waking moments, he made everything. Why would he go to people and tell them exactly what not to eat and how to eat and why? I'm thinking like, well, tell me, I want to know that. I'm running, going crazy. I was running out like crazy, just being tired at the weekends. And I look up, and God specifically says, 6 days you are to work. 1 day you are to rest. In fact, he called all the other days by numbers. This one he says, even God rested. He called it the Shabbat. And I'm looking, what's that? You know, something more, let's do it, you know. I'm at the, okay, I'm starting doing Shabbat. 2 weeks later, I got to work late. I can't keep Sabbath today because I got to get things done. You know, I got to get this work and I do this. Okay, then I'll keep Sabbath. You know, I'm just spotting it. Or touching on kosher eating and covenant things, blessings, just spotting it. But the closer I was getting to the flame, things started dropping off. Wasn't like someone was forcing me. They didn't have to even give me an instruction book. I'm reading this book, and I'm trying to say, I'm not going to do that no more. I'm not going to do this no more. You know, love thy neighbor. Oh, shit. Boy. You know, and then when you get it, it's like it's difficult to go back. You know, okay, I'll be forgiving. And that person stir you up again. Why, you blankety blank blank. You blankety blank blank. You know, and all of a sudden you stop and you go home like you typically do. And then, you know, God would take his spirit and set it inside your heart. And you're walking home. Now, you know better than that. I know. He made me mad. Well, you shouldn't have done that. I'll apologize next time. No, go apologize now. I'll apologize next time. Go apologize now. I'm sorry. That wasn't no sorry. We'll work on that. Next time, be serious. You know. Closer to the flame. And then all of a sudden, you're looking in the Bible, you look up and say, oh, he talks about that. He talks about forgiveness. He talks about, I was given an offering in church. I used to go up there and just give an offering, whatever, I'm going to go and give him something. I don't know what I'm going to give him. And all of a sudden you reach inside and say something like tithing, first fruits, offering, free will. Oh, what is this tithing? 10. God says, I love a cheerful giver. See, you got a withdrawn spirit. I don't need your money. Put it back in your pocket. And come to me when you love me. You go, but God, I do love you. Okay, then how come you're hesitant here? You wasn't hesitant when you was down at the movie. You wasn't hesitant when you was in the restaurant. You wasn't hesitant when you was in that clothing store. You're trying to negotiate how I'm going to get a better deal. You're looking all over. He says, but now you come before me and you're going, oh, how much did I got? He turns around and looks and says, keep it. I don't need it. Cattle on 1,000 hills is mine. It's all mine. I'm just trying to set you up so that you can be blessed.
Yes, come on.
You know, you can withdraw all you want. That's your call. I'm just saying, in my word, I said, there's blessings and there's cursings. There's an order. There's a distinction. There's things I set in place so that you can live on earth well. You're walking in ignorance and you're hurting yourself over and over. It's hard kicking against the person, aren't it? You're fighting something and you know you're fighting it. You're just trying to, see, you're trying to treat me like man. You don't understand holy and profane. You don't understand the difference of the sanctification. When you walk in church, you're looking at it as a place, a Sunday morning gathering so you can see family and friends and go out to eat after dinner and stuff. You said, but all the worship, you worship me with your lips, but your heart is still far from me. You're doing all the religious trappings, you're doing all the stuff, and you think you're right, but you're lost. And all of a sudden you stop and you go, oh my God. And the more I read, I start seeing heart issues. I start seeing where he's trying to bless and set you up. He puts some people in the earth to be salt that we can taste and see that he is good.
Yes, come on.
And it's not that to emulate them. He says, they're trying to show you, if you keep my ways, your cup will run over. Who else is going to tell you that? I'm saying, all my upbringing, no one's revealing the truth. Everyone's got an agenda. There's things thought, but I didn't know that God, who's not a respecter of person, can look in little Perry, Iowa, and grab a little me, open up my heart, dump himself inside me to show me how to walk without a father. Because he is the Father.
Yes.
He can give me insight and wisdom that I can't even get from a book. He can show me things to heal me.
Yes.
That the broken psychiatrists who can't heal themselves or can't even heal me. He said, just maintain the 3, stay close to the flame, and the closer to the flame you get, stuff just drops off. It makes you think of that spaceship coming back from outer space. You see it, it's just entering the Earth's atmosphere. It gets super hot. Things start burning off of it and falling off of it and stuff. So I can find myself missing what he's talking about. Because my mind is thinking in terms that I don't want the restriction under Torah. I don't want the restriction under the law. Why? Because that takes all the fun out of living. I can't do everything I want to do. I can't be profane. I can't dance like I want to dance. I can't do this stuff. I can't gamble. I can't. God said, you did all that stuff, you broke, ain't got nothing, hurting yourself, full of junk, ill, sick, but I still love you. Give you my grace. See, and what we keep saying was, because we all think it's all about us, we forget about the distinction. Who's Paul talking to? He's not talking against what's already been set in place, because these people are doing some things. Because when I go in the scripture and I look at all the covenants, I look at all the ways we talk about blessing, God uses words with them like forever and ever, for eternity, throughout all your generations. He's using eternal words to them. And he holds them responsible because he says, I made a covenant with you. But There's other ones I draw in. And what Paul would say, who was once without covenant, on the outside, didn't even know God, had no grace. By his wonder, he took and grabbed me and grafted me into the richness. So Paul wasn't speaking to his brethren. He wasn't talking about undoing any of that stuff. Even Yeshua didn't undo that stuff. Even when Yeshua came into earth, you think, people say, well, Paul put away with all that stuff. Put that under the law. We're not under the law, we're under grace. We have to do all that stuff. And Paul's thinking like, when he went back to Jerusalem, I'm not abandoning anything. Even Yeshua came in, who made Paul, who made Moses, who made all. I love it when he looked at them and says, before Abraham was, I am. What do you mean? Before all this stuff you're talking about, Father Abraham, he said, I knew him. I made Abraham before he even came. See? But what did he say? That guy, Yeshua. Don't think that I come to undo the law and the prophets. Don't think I come down doing that. Why? He said, it all will be fulfilled. Every jot, every tittle. Nothing will be changed. Nothing. The earth won't cease until it's all fulfilled. That's what he told them. No. I said lines of distinction have been blurred. Holy things, profane things, gender stuff, all these things are blurring. Paul had a distinct call. They had a distinct call. God, who's a God of distinction, put things in place for this in order for the fulfillment of all things. No. It said, God is called Hamadel. Incredible Hebrew word, but it means the one who separates, the one who makes distinction. He says, I knew who Paul was, I knew who Peter was, I knew who you were, I knew all of them. He says, but I am the God who makes decision. I'm the God who makes separation. A Jewish brother will look at that word and they will say, it's he who makes a distinction between holy and profane. He separates the common from the uncommon. It's Abba, it's God who formed the whole earth and all that was in it. Everything is in it. It said he formed everything. Why? And then it said, he who separates, he said, God then turns around and he separates light from darkness. He calls forth and he separates the firmament, the water from above, the water below. It's God who's making the distinction between the elements and separating. And what man is trying to put back together, God says he did it from the beginning. It's God who made male and female, made them both distinct in their call. He's the one who turned out and makes all the days, all time, and of all time, he reached out and he sanctifies and separates one day that he calls the Shabbat. He calls it his holy day, his time. I love it. He says he even is the God that separates Israel from the nations. Why? He said he calls Israel, the nation of Israel, like the apple of his eye. They had a specific call, a specific place. I love the analogy when I started looking at that, because like people turn around and says, so they're chosen. What does that mean? Are you chosen? They're the chosen ones. I say, it's like what God does. It's like he has a carpenter and he has a toolbox. And all the tools inside the toolbox. So he grabs the toolbox and he walks, I can walk up to that door, and of all the tools in my box, I can turn around and says, I need a screwdriver to undo that hinge. So I reach inside the toolbox with all the stuff. For right now, that screwdriver is chosen. I pull it out because I need it to do a specific task. I need it to undo my hinge. So I set it, so right now, it's chosen above all the hammers and the drills and all. I don't need a hammer right now. I don't need a drill right now. I need a screwdriver. I need something that's going to serve the purpose for what I need right now. So I grabbed that chosen tool to work on a hinge. If I try to remove that hinge on that door with a hammer, everyone will laugh. I said, no, you're going to break up the door. I'm not, boom, boom, just pound it. Just get a screwdriver. It's shaped specifically for that call, for that purpose. That's what God did with the nation of Israel. He turned around and says, I chose a nation to be salt in a darkened world. I chose them to serve a purpose. These people are worshiping everything. They got idols in high places all over the place. I needed people to show them who or how to worship God. I gave them the priesthood. I gave them the sacrificial system. I gave them the Torah instructions. From them, I'm going to bring forth the Messiah. I chose a nation to bring forth salvation. Not that they are better than anyone else. That's what God told them. Don't think that you're better than anyone else. You're the least. But you have a chosen call, and your call is to do this. And I'm going to hold you accountable to your call. Now, Matthew, I called you to minister. I called you to teach. Yeah, but God, what am I doing? No, I'm telling you what I shaped you for. That loud, boisterous voice you got, people, that's because you didn't have a mic yet, but I wanted people to hear you. I even made you taller so that you can stand out. People walk in and say, ooh, what are you doing? Well, I just came in the room. God said, I got all the pieces around you to fulfill what I put in you. Some people can sit there and they have beautiful voices. And I'm going, I said, I didn't call you for that. I called you to teach. Yeah, but I can't sing like her. Well, I called her to sing. Now, I called this one to dance. I called this one to pray. I called this one to intercede. I called this one. But with all the different callings, they all bring glory to me because they're all part of the same body. No one's special. Don't get caught up in all that. Yeah, but I want to be like him. Well, he's held responsible for his. I need you not to be an idol worshiper. Don't idolize him. Focus on me. I have things inside you that I need you to do. But God says he's very distinct. He sets things apart. He prepares our hearts that we may understand and walk accordingly to what he'll have us to do. Amen? So as a people, my conclusive thoughts are saying as a people, that's me, as a ministry, we must find ourselves stained plumb with God's order of distinction. I want to stay in line to how God is thinking, and I want to understand the distinction of what he's made. I want to stay in sync. I want to stay in plumb with God's order of distinction. Why is that? We're seeing the result of it today. You remove his distinction and you have confusion. You have chaos. You have anarchy. Remove what he set aside. Remove what he has called very distinct. That's how come he makes things like this. He tells us as humankind, to interact with humankind. He says, don't be looking over and try to look at no beast. He says, it's confusion. It's profane. Mingling and murdering. I love a God of distinction who has a call for us, a call for them, a call for him, and a call for her. A God who is not a respecter of people, but a wonder for us all. Amen? Amen.